Ilara, a passionate stylist at Vivian's salon on Main Street, poured her heart into a free haircut for a broken veteran she found shivering outside, clutching coffee she'd given him. By day's end, her kindness shattered her career, yet ignited a blazing new path. Hello everyone, welcome to Narrative Whispers. Today, I'm going to share another heartwarming story. So let's dive into it. Morning light filtered through the large front windows of Vivian's hair salon, casting warm rectangles on the polished floor. Ilara wiped down her station, humming softly as she arranged her tools with practiced precision. Scissors lined up by size, combs in their sanitizing solution, and her collection of styling products organized by frequency of use. The familiar scents of shampoo and hairspray hung in the air, comforting in their constancy. At 28, Ilara had been cutting hair since she was 16, first in her parents' garage for friends, then through cosmetology school, and now, for the past 3 years, at the most reputable salon in Mapleton. It wasn't just a job to her, it was a calling. Every client who sat in her chair was a canvas, a conversation, a connection. "Mrs. Peterson is coming in at 9, called Vivian from the reception desk, her voice crisp and businesslike. "She requested you specifically again." Vivian Reeves, the 50-something owner of the salon, ran her business with military precision. Her salt and pepper bob was always immaculate, her makeup subtle but perfect, her navy pantsuits without a single wrinkle. She had built the salon from nothing 20 years ago, weathering economic downturns and competing businesses through sheer force of will and an uncompromising dedication to quality. Ilara admired her, even if Vivian's rigid adherence to rules sometimes felt stifling. "I'll be ready," Ilara replied, checking her watch. She had 15 minutes before Mrs. Peterson would arrive seeking her monthly trim and the latest town gossip. Just enough time for a coffee from the shop next door. Grabbing her wallet from her purse, she stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The leaves on Main Street had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the morning traffic was picking up as the town stirred to life. Mapleton was small enough that most faces were familiar, which was why the man sitting on the bench across the street caught her attention. He wasn't from around here, or at least, Ilara didn't recognize him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that spoke of military training, he sat hunched over, as if trying to make himself smaller. His hair, a dark brown, with hints of gray at the temples, hung past his collar in uneven lengths, and his beard was unkempt. But it was his eyes that struck her, distant and haunted, focused somewhere far beyond the quiet street. A tattered green duffel bag sat at his feet, and his jacket, despite the cool weather, was threadbare at the elbows. As Ilara watched, he ran a hand through his hair in what seemed like frustration, then checked his watch and sighed deeply. The coffee shop bell jingled as Ilara pushed the door open, her mind still on the stranger. "Morning, Ilara," called Joe, the barista, already preparing her usual order. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She nodded and smiled, but her thoughts were elsewhere. When Joe handed her the steaming cup, she impulsively ordered a second one, black with 2 sugars. "Got a new client?" Joe asked with a grin. Ilara shrugged, dropping a $5 bill in the tip jar. "Something like that," she replied, balancing the 2 cups carefully as she pushed the door open with her shoulder. The man was still there when she crossed the street, his gaze now fixed on a piece of paper in his hands. Up close, she could see the fatigue etched into his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the deep lines around his mouth that spoke of too little smiling and too much worry. "Excuse me?" she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up sharply, his body tensing before he registered her outstretched hand holding the coffee cup. "You looked like you could use this," she explained. His confusion was evident, eyebrows drawing together in a wary line. "I don't," he began, then cleared his throat. "I can't pay for that." "It's just coffee," Ilara said, setting the cup down on the bench beside him. And it's already paid for, so you might as well drink it before it gets cold. She offered a smile, warm and genuine. For a moment he hesitated, then slowly reached for the cup, nodding his thanks. "I'm Alara," she added. "I work at the salon across the street." He glanced at the paper in his hand, then at the salon's awning. "Marcus," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. I actually have an appointment there, job interview at Thompson's Hardware after, and I thought—" He trailed off, a flush creeping up his neck. "It's been a while since I've had a proper haircut." Ilara checked her watch, with 8 minutes until Mrs. Peterson. "I have a client coming soon," she said. "But if you're early for your appointment, I could probably fit you in right now." Marcus shook his head, looking uncomfortable. "My appointment's at 11. I got the bus into town early. I'll wait." He took a sip of the coffee, the warmth seeming to ease some of the tension in his shoulders. Ilara noticed the military insignia half hidden on his duffel bag. "You served?" she asked gently. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Marines. 2 tours in Afghanistan." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken weight. Mrs. Peterson's arrival, announced by the cheerful jingle of her bangle bracelets, pulled Ilara back to reality. "I need to go," she said, already backing toward the salon, "but I hope I'll see you at 11. Marcus nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly. Grateful, she thought, but still wary. As she hurried back to the salon, Ilara couldn't shake the image of those haunted eyes. She'd seen that look before, in her uncle who'd served in Desert Storm. The 1,000-yard stare, he'd called it, looking at something no one else could see. The morning passed in a blur of clients and conversations, Mrs. Peterson's trim and highlights, Mr. Abernathy's monthly buzz cut, the Chen twins' identical bobs. Through it all, Ilara found her gaze drifting to the window, checking if Marcus was still on the bench. He was, sometimes staring at his coffee cup, sometimes rehearsing what looked like interview answers under his breath. At 10:55, she saw him stand, smooth down his worn jacket, and cross the street toward the salon. "I've got this one," she told Vivian, who was updating the appointment book. Vivian glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she assessed Marcus through the window. "He's not on the schedule," she said, her tone questioning. "Walk in," Ilara replied quickly. "I can fit him in before my 11:30. Vivian's lips pursed in momentary disapproval. She preferred the order of scheduled appointments, but she nodded. "Fine. Just make sure you're ready for Mrs. Mayer at 11:30. She's always 10 minutes early and 15 minutes worth of fussy." The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus stepped inside, immediately looking out of place among the salon's polished surfaces and elegant decor. He clutched his duffel bag like a lifeline, his knuckles white. I don't have an appointment," he admitted to Vivian, whose eyebrow arched in question. Ilara stepped forward quickly. "It's fine, Vivian. I told him to come in. I've got time." Leading Marcus to her station, Ilara felt a pang at his obvious discomfort. "When was your last haircut?" she asked, keeping her tone light as she draped the black cape around his shoulders. He stiffened at the touch. "Military barber. Before I got discharged," he replied, his reflection in the mirror avoiding her eyes. "About 8 months ago." Ilara nodded, assessing the uneven growth. "And what are we looking for today? Something for a job interview, you said?" Marcus's hands twisted in his lap beneath the cape. "Yeah, at Thompson's Hardware. Nothing fancy, just presentable." He hesitated. "Look, I should be honest. I don't have much money, just enough for the bus fare home if I don't get this job. So nothing expensive, please." Ilara's hands stilled in his hair. She'd noticed the worn edges of his wallet when he'd reached into his pocket, the careful way he'd sipped the coffee, as if making it last. Making a quick decision, She met his eyes in the mirror. "Let's make a deal," she said quietly. "I'll give you my best work, and in return, you promise to let me know how the interview goes. Deal?" Confusion flickered across his face. "But the cost!" Ilara waved a dismissive hand. "First-time client discount," she lied smoothly. "Now let's get you looking sharp for that interview." Relief and something like gratitude softened the hard lines of his face. "Thank you," he said, so low she almost didn't hear it. "I won't forget this." As she worked, Ilara kept up a gentle stream of conversation, careful to avoid personal questions that might make him uncomfortable. Instead, she told him about Mapleton, the best places to eat on a budget, the quieter corners of the park where you could sit undisturbed, the community center that hosted free events on weekends. Gradually, the rigid set of his shoulders relaxed, and he began to respond, his voice growing smoother with use. She learned he was staying at the Veterans Hostel 2 towns over, that he'd been looking for work for 3 months without success, that before Afghanistan he'd worked construction and knew his way around tools. "That's perfect for Thompson's," she encouraged, trimming the hair at his nape. "The owner, Jack, he's a fair man. Tough, but honest." The transformation when she finished was remarkable. The unkempt beard was gone, replaced by clean-shaven cheeks that revealed a strong jawline. His hair, now neatly cut and styled, framed features that were handsome beneath the weariness. But the most significant change was in his posture. Straighter now, with a hint of the military bearing she'd glimpsed earlier. "There," she said, removing the cape with a flourish. "Interview ready." Marcus stared at his reflection, reaching up to touch his face, as if to confirm the change was real. Thank you," he said, turning to face her directly for the first time. "Really, this means Ilara." Vivian's voice cut through the moment, sharp as scissors. "A word, please." Ilara turned to find her boss standing by the reception desk, arms crossed, expression flinty. Beside her, the appointment book lay open, a red line drawn through Marcus's slot, a walk-in that should have been charged at full price. "Excuse me," Ilara murmured to Marcus, her cheeks heating. "Let me just ring you up." But as she stepped toward the desk, Vivian shook her head minutely, eyes flicking to the back office. This wasn't going to be a public conversation. "I'll be right back," Ilara promised Marcus, whose expression had closed again, wariness returning to his eyes. As she followed Vivian to the office, she felt the curious gazes of the other stylists and clients. The door closed behind them with a soft click that nonetheless felt final, like a jail cell locking. Vivian turned, her posture rigid. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice controlled but vibrating with anger. Ilara straightened her spine. "Helping someone who needed it," she replied, striving for calm. "He's a veteran, Vivian, down on his luck. He has a job interview and You gave away services that aren't yours to give," Vivian interrupted. "This isn't a charity, Ilara. It's a business, my business. One that pays your salary, may I remind you?" She tapped a manicured nail on the desk. "I've overlooked the occasional discounts you give to college students or single mothers, but a full-service men's cut and style, plus a shave, that's over $60 of services." Ilara felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I'll pay for it myself," she offered. "Take it out of my paycheck." But Vivian shook her head. "It's not about the money. It's about respect. Respect for this salon, for our pricing structure, for my authority as the owner." Ilara took a deep breath. "I respect you, Vivian. You know I do. But sometimes there are more important things than rules." Even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a mistake. Vivian's eyes went from flinty to glacial. "Not in my salon, there aren't," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This isn't the first time we've had this conversation, is it?" The free, deep conditioning for the teenage girl with the bad home dye job. The complimentary styling for the woman going to her husband's funeral who couldn't afford both the haircut and the dress. She sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. You're a talented stylist, Alara. One of my best. But I can't have an employee who undermines my policies at will. The realization of what was happening hit Alara like a physical blow. You're firing me, she said, her voice small. It wasn't a question. Vivian didn't bother to soften the blow. Yes, I'm sorry, but this is the final straw. You can collect your personal tools, and I'll have your final check mailed to you. Alara felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. 3 years at this salon. Clients who requested her specifically. A steady income that had finally allowed her to start saving for her own place, instead of the cramped apartment she shared with 2 roommates. All gone, because she'd tried to help someone. Vivian, please, she began, but the salon owner held up a hand. My decision is final. Please gather your things and leave without a scene. I'll have Melissa take your remaining appointments today. With that, Vivian turned back to her computer, a clear dismissal. Alara stood frozen for a moment, shock giving way to a hollow feeling in her chest. Then, with as much dignity as she could muster, she nodded once and left the office. Marcus was still at her station, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror as she approached. One look at her face told him everything. It's my fault, he said immediately, rising from the chair. Let me talk to her. Explain that It's not your fault. Alara cut him off, her voice low but firm. It's a disagreement that's been building for a while. She began gathering her personal tools, the special scissors her parents had given her when she graduated, the set of premium brushes she'd saved for, the collection of styling products she preferred to the salon's standard offerings. The familiar actions helped steady her hands, even as her mind raced with panic about rent, bills, references. What would she tell her parents? How quickly could she find another position? Marcus hovered awkwardly, clearly distressed. Please, there must be something I can do, he insisted. You were just trying to help me. Alara managed a smile that felt brittle around the edges. You can ace that interview, she said, zipping her tool case closed. That would make this worth it. She hesitated, then added, and maybe let me know how it goes. I meant what I said about that deal. For a moment, Marcus looked like he might argue further, but something in her expression must have stopped him. Instead, he straightened to his full height, squaring his shoulders in an unconscious echo of military stance. I will, he promised. And thank you. I won't forget this. As he turned to leave, the weight of what had just happened seemed to press down on Alara's shoulders. 3 years of building a clientele, of establishing herself in the community, gone in an instant. The salon had fallen strangely silent, other stylists and clients pretending not to watch as she packed up her station. Alara? Melissa's voice was hesitant at her elbow. I'm so sorry. We all are. This isn't right. Alara looked up to see genuine distress on her colleague's face. Thanks, she managed. Take good care of Mrs. Peterson for me, will you? She likes to hear about your kids. With her bag packed and her dignity in tatters, Alara walked out of Vivian's hair salon for the last time, the bell above the door seeming to mock her with its cheerful jingle. The next morning, Alara sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring blankly at job listings on her laptop. She'd been up most of the night, alternating between panic attacks and frantic calculations of how long her savings would last. The classifieds were discouraging. One salon on the other side of town was hiring, but the commute would be nearly 2 hours by bus. Another wanted 5 years of high-end salon experience. Others paid barely above minimum wage, a significant step down from what she'd been making at Vivian's. The buzz of her phone startled her. A text from an unknown number. I got the job. Starting Monday. Thank you again. Would like to repay you somehow. Oh. Marcus. Despite everything, Alara smiled. At least something good had come from yesterday's disaster. She texted back congratulations, then set her phone aside, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. She needed work, and soon. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting her roommate, who often forgot her key, Alara opened it without checking. Instead, she found Sarah Chen, notepad in hand and press badge pinned to her jacket. "Ilara Barrett?" the journalist asked. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Mapleton Gazette. I'd like to talk to you about what happened at Vivian's salon yesterday." Ilara blinked in surprise. "How did you—" Sarah smiled. "Small town, big news. May I come in?" An hour later, Ilara's story had poured out, not just about Marcus, but about all the small kindnesses that had apparently violated salon policy over the years. Sarah's pen flew across her notepad, her eyes bright with interest. "This is exactly the kind of community story our readers connect with," she explained. "Compassion versus commerce. Heart versus bottom line." Ilara shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want to hurt Vivian's business," she admitted. "She built that salon from nothing. I just disagree with some of her policies." Sarah's smile turned knowing. "That's what makes this story compelling. It's not about villains, it's about values. And speaking of values..." She pulled out her phone, showing Ilara a local community forum page where dozens of comments expressed outrage at her firing. Some were calling for a boycott of Vivian's, others were offering job leads. "I had no idea," Ilara murmured, scrolling through the comments. Many were from former clients, praising her skill and kindness. Sarah took back her phone. "The story runs tomorrow," she said. "Front page of the local section. Do you have a good photo I could use? And a quote about what you plan to do next?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because Ilara herself didn't know. What was next? Another salon? A complete career change? The uncertainty was terrifying. I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. Sarah nodded understandingly. "Well, when you do, let me know. I have a feeling this isn't the end of your story." The article, when it appeared the next day, was more powerful than Ilara had anticipated. Sarah had titled it, "The Cost of Compassion, Local Stylist Fired for Act of Kindness to Veteran," and it painted a vivid picture of the incident, complete with quotes from other stylists and clients who had witnessed it. Marcus, too, had apparently spoken to Sarah, his quote reading, "Ms. Barrett's kindness gave me the confidence to secure my first job since returning from deployment. I owe her more than I can repay." By mid-morning, Ilara's phone was buzzing constantly with messages of support, job offers from smaller salons in neighboring towns, and even a few former clients asking if she would consider home visits until she found a new position. Most surprising was the call from Mayor Thompson's office, requesting a meeting that afternoon. Baffled but hopeful, Ilara put on her most professional outfit and made her way to the town hall. The mayor, a formidable woman in her 60s with a reputation for straight talk and community advocacy, welcomed Ilara into her office with a firm handshake. "Quite a stir you've caused," she said, gesturing for Ilara to take a seat. "Half the town is talking about boycotting Vivian's, and the other half is asking where they can find you for their next haircut." Ilara felt her cheeks flush. "That wasn't my intention," she began, but Mayor Thompson waved a dismissive hand. "Intention aside, it's happened, and it's brought attention to something I've been concerned about for a while, the lack of support services for our returning veterans." She leaned forward, fixing Ilara with an appraising gaze. "The town council has been sitting on some development grant money. We've been looking for the right project, and I think I've found it." From her desk, she pulled out a folder and slid it across to Ilara. Inside were printouts of a small storefront on Pine Street, vacant for nearly a year since the bookstore had closed. "The building's city-owned," Mayor Thompson explained. "We could offer a subsidized lease to the right business, one that might, for instance, reserve 1 day a week for discounted services to veterans or others in need." Ilara's heart began to race. "Are you suggesting that..." The mayor's smile was small but genuine. I'm suggesting that Mapleton could use a salon with heart, one that balances good business with compassion. The grant could cover initial renovation costs. The rest would be up to you. She tapped the folder. Think about it. The town needs more small business owners who understand that a community thrives when we look out for each other. Alara's mind whirled with possibilities. Her own salon, her own policies, a chance to build something that reflected her values. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Mayor Thompson chuckled. Say you'll consider it, and say you'll come to the town council meeting next Tuesday to discuss it formally. As Alara left the town hall, the folder clutched to her chest. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. I heard what happened, he said without preamble. The article in the Gazette, I wanted to check if you're okay. The genuine concern in his voice touched her. I think I am, she replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. Actually, I might have some news. Good news, but I need to think it through. She hesitated, then added, Would you want to meet for coffee? I could use someone to talk it through with. The pause on the other end was brief. I'd like that, Marcus said. I owe you that much, at least. Alara smiled, the tension of the past few days easing slightly. You don't owe me anything, but I'd appreciate the company. 3 months later, Alara stood in the center of compassion cuts, watching as Marcus hung the framed first dollar on the wall beside the reception desk. The salon was small but bright, with large windows letting in natural light, comfortable chairs, and walls painted a warm, welcoming shade of blue. The renovation had been a community effort. Jack Thompson had donated hardware and sent Marcus and 2 other employees to help with the construction. The beauty school had sent students for a work-study program. Even Melissa from Vivian's had stopped by on her day off to help paint. Perfect, Alara declared as Marcus stepped back from the frame. Official enough for you? Marcus smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes, so different from the haunted look she'd first seen on the park bench. Very official, he agreed. In the months since their first meeting, he'd become not just a friend, but an unofficial business advisor, helping her navigate permits, budgets, and the grant paperwork with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to his work at Thompson's. The door chimed, and Mayor Thompson entered, followed by Sarah Chen and a small group of town officials. Ready for the ribbon cutting? The mayor asked, brandishing an oversized pair of scissors. As Alara stepped forward to take them, she caught sight of a familiar figure through the window. Vivian stood across the street, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither woman moved. Then, slowly, Vivian gave a single nod, not quite approval, but perhaps acknowledgement. Alara nodded back, a complicated mix of emotions rising in her chest. She had learned from Vivian, both what to do and what not to do as a salon owner. In a strange way, she owed her this moment. The mayor cleared her throat, recalling Alara's attention. Whenever you're ready, she prompted, glancing pointedly at the gathered crowd. Taking a deep breath, Alara cut the ribbon. Applause erupted, and the small crowd began to filter into the salon, admiring the space. First appointment scheduled for tomorrow, Alara announced. But today I have one special client. She turned to Marcus with a grin. 3 months means you're due for a trim, he laughed, reaching up to touch his hair. Can't have the assistant manager at Thompson's looking scruffy, he agreed. As he settled into her chair, Alara caught his gaze in the mirror. We've come a long way from that park bench, haven't we? She observed, draping the cape around his shoulders. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. You know, in the Marines, we had this saying, leave no one behind. I think you live by that too, in your own way. Alara considered this as she combed through his hair. I just believe everyone deserves dignity, she said simply. And sometimes that starts with something as small as a haircut. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and across the street, Vivian's salon was closing for the day. Ilara noticed Vivian pausing one last time to look at the new salon before walking away. Perhaps someday they would find a way to mend that bridge. For now, though, Ilara was exactly where she needed to be, paws scissors in hand, surrounded by the community that had helped her build a dream she hadn't even known she had. The weeks that followed saw Compassion Cuts steadily growing its clientele. True to her word, Ilara reserved Wednesdays for discounted services to veterans, seniors on fixed incomes, and others in need. The policy occasionally meant longer hours and tighter margins, but the gratitude in her clients' eyes made it worthwhile. More surprising was the salon's success on other days. It seemed that many in Mapleton appreciated the warm atmosphere and community-minded approach. By the second month, Ilara had hired 2 part-time stylists to help with the increasing bookings. One Wednesday afternoon, as Ilara was finishing up with an elderly veteran who had come in for a haircut before his granddaughter's wedding, the door chimed. She looked up to find Vivian standing uncertainly in the entrance, looking as immaculate as ever in a charcoal pantsuit. The salon fell momentarily silent, the history between the 2 women well known throughout the town. "Vivian," Ilara said, keeping her voice neutral as she removed the cape from her client. "What brings you here?" Vivian glanced around the salon, taking in the comfortable chaos, the children's corner with books and small toys, the coffee station where clients helped themselves, the wall of photographs showing before and after transformations of veterans who had come through the doors. "I wanted to see it for myself," Vivian admitted. "You've done well." The acknowledgement clearly cost her something, but her expression seemed more tired than angry. "Business has been down," she continued, her voice lower, "since the article, since everything." Ilara felt a pang of sympathy despite herself. She gestured to her office, a tiny space off the main floor. "Would you like to talk privately?" Vivian hesitated, then nodded. As they stepped into the small room, Ilara noticed Marcus watching from where he sat at the reception desk, concern evident in his furrowed brow. She gave him a reassuring smile before closing the door. "I'm not here to ask for your return," Vivian said immediately, taking the seat Ilara offered. "And I'm not here to apologize. I stood by my business principles, and I still do." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her pants. "But I am here to reconsider certain policies." Ilara blinked in surprise. "What kind of policies?" she asked carefully. Vivian sighed. "The town has changed, or perhaps I haven't changed with it. Either way, I'm losing clients to this avro." She gestured vaguely at the walls. "Oh, this more community-oriented approach." The admission clearly pained her. "I thought perhaps we could discuss a collaboration of sorts." Ilara leaned back in her chair, studying the woman who had once been her mentor as well as her boss. "What kind of collaboration?" she asked, curiosity piqued. Vivian straightened, all business once more. "Your salon is becoming known for its work with veterans and others in need. Mine still has the reputation for high-end services and technical excellence. Perhaps there's a way we could complement each other. Referrals, shared events, maybe even," she hesitated, "a joint program for training stylists who want to work specifically with veterans or medical patients." The proposal was unexpected but not unwelcome. Ilara considered it, seeing both the olive branch and the business strategy behind it. "I'd be open to discussing something along those lines," she said finally. "Not a merger, but a collaboration, as equals." The qualifier was important. She would not return to working under Vivian's strict rules. Vivian nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "As equals," she agreed. "We both have something to offer this town, perhaps more together than apart." She rose, extending her hand. "Shall we schedule a proper meeting? Next week, perhaps?" As they shook hands, Ilara felt a surprising sense of closure. The resentment she had carried since her firing hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more productive. "Next week," she confirmed. Vivian turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your work," she said, nodding toward the main salon where the elderly veteran was now showing Marcus photos of his granddaughter. "It's good. Different from what I would do, but good." With that, she left, the bell chiming softly behind her. Marcus appeared in the office doorway moments later. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern still evident in his voice. Ilara nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "Yes," she said. "I think it is." Outside, the afternoon sun broke through clouds, casting patterns across the salon floor. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined standing here, in her own space, surrounded by people who shared her vision, finding reconciliation with the past while building toward the future. All because she'd offered a cup of coffee and a haircut to a stranger in need. "You know," Marcus said, following her gaze to where the sunlight illuminated the salon's sign in the window. "Compassion cuts, where everyone matters. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact." Ilara smiled, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. "And sometimes," she replied, "they come back to us in ways we never expected." She picked up her scissors, ready for her next client. "That's what makes them worth it." Thank you for listening to this story. If you like it, please do not forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story of Narrative Whispers.